talk through a lot of the questions or themes that came up. Lisa Schuchman, who's our executive director at PPS, is with us. She is doing double duty right now. She's doing some other things while she's paying attention to us, but when she's fully available, she will hop in and she'll talk about some of the special education questions and concerns, as well as some of the socio-emotional learning and supports. Certainly a lot of questions and conversation around helping students transition and mental health and those things. So let me first start by saying how we got here. Indian Point, as you folks know, because you live closer to it than almost anyone in the district, Indian Point is closing. With Indian Point goes a significant amount of resources in our district. Indian Point accounted for 30% of our budget. So 3 out of every $10 that our district spent on buses and programs and supplies and materials, 3 out of $10 came from Indian Point. That's big. For a school district to lose 30% of its budget is a very significant reduction. You know, I don't need to tell you folks, you know, you could close your eyes for 2 seconds and realize what your life would look like if you had lost 30% of your family revenue. So the Board of Education decided to commission a study. We had some outside consultants who do this work for a living. They looked at our school facilities. They looked at our enrollment. They looked at our classrooms. And their goal was to determine, can we reorganize students a little differently to perhaps save some money and create more efficiencies in our programs, both elementary, middle school, I guess all three, elementary, middle school, and high school. So at the middle school and high school, we're taking a really close look at enrollment, and we're taking a look at the courses that students take. In the last 10 years, our enrollment in our school district has gone down 10%. All right. BV, over the last 10 years, enrollment has stayed pretty flat. The enrollment at Frank G has remained pretty flat. The enrollment at Furnace Woods is down by about a third. All right, don't quote me on that, but it's pretty close. They went from about 330 kids to about 230 kids. So that's really where we're seeing the significant decline in enrollment. So the board reviewed this study. The study is online on our cost analysis and Princeton Plan page, 84-page study that basically said you can save money if you move some kids around, if you close some schools, if you really engage in very aggressive tactics. The Board of Education is not interested in closing schools. They're not interested in 5th graders being at the middle school for very, very sound reasons. So we ended up, the board ended up asking us to study the Princeton Plan. The Princeton Plan is also known as grade level banding. That's a more formal term. It's basically where every child in your school district goes to school together by grade level, regardless of where they live. So it doesn't matter your zip code, doesn't matter what corner of the school district you live in. All kids by grade level will start together in kindergarten and go through the elementary school system together as a group. All right. What that does is that creates very, very significant efficiencies. There have been many, many times I have met with many of you on the camera talking about class size at BV. I have met with parents at Furnace Woods and Frank G talking about class size there. In our current model, our class size at the elementary school is contingent on how many kids live in those neighborhoods at that time that need a particular educational experience, meaning how many 5-year-olds do we have at Furnace Woods that need kindergarten? How many 8-year-olds do we have at BV that need 3rd grade? All right. In the Princeton Plan, when you have all of the students together by grade level, you can spread them out over your teachers, and you can have more equity in terms of class size. You can have more equity in terms of student backgrounds and demographics, whether they receive a free and reduced lunch, whether they speak English very well, or they speak a second language. It accounts for more equity because everyone is in the same place at the same time. Think of the Princeton Plan like how middle schools and high schools are organized, right? In our district, we go to 3 different elementary schools, and then we all come together in 6th grade. And then we all have we move through 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade together and into the high school. The Princeton Plan basically does the same, just starts in kindergarten. Grab kids together by grade level and they move through the organization together. All right. That creates some challenges, right? It means that some kids are going to be on the bus a little bit longer. It means that they're going to be moving between schools a little more frequently. And we had a committee that asked a lot of those questions. Antoinette asked those questions. Katie Valentino asked those questions. Mr. Cohen asked questions. Lisa Schuchman, myself. About 40 people were talking to other teachers, other parents in 3 other districts near us that have the Princeton Plan. Somers, Ossining, and Tarrytown. And what they said was, yes, kids are going to move between schools more often, but they're going to be okay. And the reason they're okay is because they're moving between those schools with 150 or 180 of their best friends by grade level. That actually they feel more confident moving between school A and school B and school B to school C because they now have a couple years of making friends with 100 plus students. So those 3 districts advised us to not get too hung up in whether or not kids moving schools is a problem. It's a concern for families, and we 100% understand that. But their experience, parents' experience over 15 or 20 years of having different kids move through their system, they said without hesitation, you know, that's not a real big problem. And one of them joked and said, the kids transitioning between schools is not a kid problem, it's a parent problem. And they were being cute about it, and we all laughed. But what they were trying to say was that the parents are more concerned about the transitions than the kids, right? And that means you care, and that means you're concerned. But when 3 groups of people from 3 different communities tell us to relax and don't go overboard about it, I think we really have to listen to them because they have experience in it that we don't, all right? So I'll jump into some of these questions. So one is the timeline in the model. When will the decision be made? We hope that a decision is made by the end of March. And the reason we hope it's made by the end of March is because the Princeton Plan will reduce our budget. And if we reduce our budget, it means we don't have to raise taxes as much, all right? So if we move forward with the Princeton Plan, our budget will call for a smaller tax increase than if we don't approve the Princeton Plan, all right? Last year, for all of you, we had a tax increase just under 6%. That was a lot. That was a heavy lift for a lot of people in our community. The 10 years before last year, our average tax increase was 1.04%. All right, so we had 10 years of a 1.04% tax increase and then a year of a 6. All right, we want to make sure that we don't have more years of 6% tax increase, 8%, 7%. So the idea of adopting the Princeton Plan is that would lower the amount of money really we need to run our school system, which means we can lower taxes. Now, when you move to the Princeton Plan, I talked about efficiencies, you need fewer people, all right? So what would happen is if we adopted the Princeton Plan, we would need 14 fewer teachers. Now what that means is one of 2 things. We have teachers that retire and resign all the time. You know, some people take new jobs, some people have a baby and don't want to come back, some people change careers, some people retire. We would need to follow the law. It's not my rules, it's not Mr. Cohen's rules, it's the law in terms of who would not have a job next year. The rule basically is the least senior people are the ones who would be reduced first. And that's painful, that hurts because some of our least senior people, whether they're young or not, they're newest to the organization. They really wanted to be here because they chose us instead of working at Yorktown or Peekskill or wherever. But that's the law, all right? Those aren't my rules, or you know, we don't make those rules up. The issue though is, and this is a hard message for me to say, we can't expect to implement the Princeton Plan and save money if we don't reduce our staff save money. All right. So a lot of us, and me included, sometimes can get hung up in who the teachers are that would no longer be with us. And that's a really hard thing to do, is to separate how we feel about certain people and having to let them go, and trying to make a financial decision in the best interest of the entire community that doesn't hurt kids. All right. So that's where our emotions and the math sort of come together. And I don't want to sound cold-hearted, and I hope I'm not coming across cold-hearted, but we've talked for a number of years that the Princeton Plan can bring significant savings to our school district, $2 million a year of savings. But that savings happens with fewer people. Now, we had hoped, right? We had hoped that we would have 14 teachers that were going to retire, or a combination of retire and resign or move on or do other things. And we have not hit that goal today. We might by the end of the year, because some people decide to retire, in different times of life, right? If it's going to be 65 degrees and sunny next week, someone could wake up and say, boy, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go play golf or fish or whatever. And that really happens. When people decide to retire, they do it for very personal reasons. So it could happen, but as of today, if we were to implement the Princeton Plan, there would be 12 teachers that we would need to essentially lay off as of today. I think that number will go down, and that number, I believe, will go down because other staff, I believe, will consider to retire, or other staff will take other jobs, or seek a promotion somewhere else, or some staff who may not come back. Like I said, they have a child, they have another opportunity, but right now we have 12 teachers that would be laid off and 2 that are retiring. So that's why the timeline to approve the Princeton Plan needs to happen in early April, is because that changes our math of our budget, and we need to let our entire public know specifics of our budget well in advance of the budget vote that is scheduled for late May. A question was, what happened if we wait a year? So let's say we decide to do the Princeton Plan, we support it, we want to do it, but man, Mr. Hochreiter, we're in the middle of a pandemic, we don't know what next year's going to look like. Can we please just return to our schools as normal next year and do the Princeton Plan in September of 2022? That is a distinct possibility. The question is, what do we do to make up the money? That's a decision the board's going to have to make. The board may have to go into our bank account. School districts have a bank account. It's called a reserve, and may want to use some of the reserve money to keep taxes low for 1 year. The Board of Education may say, look, we have a lot of support for the Princeton Plan, but it's just the wrong time to implement it. The board may say, look, community, we heard you. We're going to do the Princeton Plan, but we're going to wait a year, so we need 1 more year of a high tax increase to get us through. That will be a decision that the Board of Education will make. But that's really one of 2 decisions the board to make. Implement the Princeton Plan is the first decision, and then the next decision is, when is the best time to implement the Princeton Plan? All right. The model of the Princeton Plan being considered is, think of it 3 schools: School A, B, and C. School A is kindergarten and 1st grade. School B is 2nd and 3rd, and School C is 4th and 5th. We have had a lot of conversations about pre-K, and we've been dreaming about pre-K. If we had pre-K, and that's a big if because a lot of things need to happen, a pre-K program, a classroom or 2, if we were able to pull that off down the road, those pre-K classrooms would join our K-1 school. All right. Given our projected enrollment, we would have plenty of space in all 3 of our schools for any of the schools to house any of the grade levels. So BV has enough classrooms to be the K-1 school, or the 2-3, or the 4-5. All right. Similar with Frank G and Furnace Woods. In fact, we would have extra classroom space. All right. So that's important to understand. With that comes a conversation about equity and class size. All right. I'm very, very proud to say you guys have seen this. You've seen our little one-pager of all the great things in our district. And this one says we have an average class size of 19. Yay, 19. Now, at BV, we know we've had 23, 24, and 25 kids in the classroom. Sometimes at BV, we've had 14, 15, and 16. All right. 19 is an average. And it's an average of sometimes having 15 and sometimes having 23. In the Princeton Plan, because we have all of the kids by grade level in the same place at the same time, we can spread them out equally across all of the teachers in that grade level. All right. So the average class size, depending on what grade you're in, would be around 21 or 22. Okay. So the average goes up. I admit that. The average would go from 19 to 21, but every classroom would have 21. All right. It wouldn't be 15 in certain places and 24 in other certain places. We would be able to have the exact same number of kids in every single classroom. And that's really important. That's important because class size now is not a function of where you live, right? Because it is right now. Like I said, sometimes BV's had 24 and sometimes 15. And, you know, that's a good thing and a bad thing. But when everyone's in the same place at the same time, we can control for class size. We can also control for demographics. Right? Demographics are basically the makeup of our kids. And the state education department looks at 4 major demographics. Family income, which is based on free and reduced lunch, that's socioeconomic status. They look at you if you have an IEP, all right, or a special education student. They want to know if basically your ethnicity, are you white or non-white? And the third one is, do you speak English or do you not speak English? All right, so those are the 4 major demographic categories that we report to the state. So that's why we ask families those questions sometimes. So the same thing with class size. We can balance class size, same number of kids in every single classroom. We can also account for those 4 demographic factors in all of the class sizes too, so that not all of the non-white kids or white kids are in certain classrooms, or all of the students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch are in certain classrooms. If Mr. Cohen were the principal of, doesn't matter, of the 3rd and 4th grade or the 2nd and 3rd grade school, he would be able to look at his class list and he'd be able to look at that information and he'd be able to balance by number of kids in the classroom and those 4 demographic categories. He'd be able to balance those kids out across 6, 7, 8, or 9 teachers, depending how many teachers are in that grade level. All right. So we would be able to 100% guarantee that there would be equity in terms of student makeup in all of those classes and the number of students in those classes. And I think that's a really important thing. I talked about staffing in terms of implications. Families and PTA, how do we build community spirit? We spend a lot of time asking questions about the PTA because your PTA is wonderful. You have great leaders now. You had great leaders in the past, and you'll continue to have great leaders who work very, very closely with Mr. Cohen and the teachers, and certainly provide great opportunities for the kids. Those are ongoing conversations that I know they want to keep having. Each of the 3 districts that I mentioned, Somers, Terrytown, and Ossining, their PTAs operate a little bit differently, but there are a lot of similarities. So one example is they have an overarching elementary PTA for everyone grades K through 5. And then each school has their own officers that work with the principal of that school and work with the teachers to identify needs and interests and programs and have funding. So think of it like each school A, B, and C has co-presidents, right? They're the boots on the ground working with the principal and the parents and the teachers, but the overall K through 5 PTA has a board of officers and a treasurer and a secretary and those sort of things. things. So it's like 3 mini PTAs operating under one umbrella. We don't have to adopt that model. We can adopt any model we want. The good news is there are a lot of districts in New York State that operate in the Princeton Plan. And there are a lot of different ways that our PTAs could organize. Their goal, because I've been speaking with a lot of them quite a bit. I've seen Antoinette and Katie. We've been seeing each other more than we care to admit over the last couple of weeks. But we've been talking about this because it's really, really important. And we want to make sure that the kids and the parents feel served and that their voices feel heard. And that's going to certainly be a priority moving forward. I'll touch on transportation and then I'll turn it over to Lisa Schuchman. So start and end times of the school are unknown, but we know that they may need to change because we will have some families that very well could have kids in all 3 schools. We're actively trying to find out how many families would have kids in all 3 schools. Busing, think of this, how long of a bus ride? Right now, buses that take kids who live in Furnace Woods to go to the high school, those buses take anywhere between 30 and 40 minutes, all right? BV students who live in BV and take a bus to the middle school for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, those buses are anywhere between 30 and 40 minutes. So we use that as an example because if you live in BV and you're going to the middle school, you're driving right by Furnace Woods, right? So your bus ride might be a couple minutes shorter. If you live way over in Furnace Woods and you're going to the high school, your bus ride could be a few minutes longer or it could be shorter, all right? And that's important to understand because some of the buses, depending on where the kids live, the bus may go through Peekskill, go down Hudson Avenue and loop around, could shave off a few more minutes rather than driving all the way around Blue Mountain and blah, 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 down by the district office here and the free library. So I can't tell you how long your child will be on the bus because we first have to determine if we're going to do this, and then we've got to pick what schools would have which grade levels, and then we plug the kids into the system and our transportation folks downstairs with some help of consultants who know how to use the software, who work with us quite a bit. They'll be able to help us with what the best routes are, with what is the quickest way to get from point A to point B. Point A meaning your house and point B being the school. So I can't tell you how long your child will be on a bus because there are still some decisions that need to be made. But it's important to have in the back of your mind that 30 to 40 minutes, because that's right now how long kids are on a bus if they're going to the high school from Furnace Woods or the middle school from BV. All right, so that's just a good way to think of it for right now. So Lisa Schuchman, I'll turn it over to you. We had a couple themes from the questions that Mr. Cohen received in terms of special education, and it looks like more importantly social emotional support and how we help kids transition and mental health and all of those things. I'm going to turn my camera off because I need a glass of water because I've been talking so much. So Mrs. Schuchman, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. So I have about 3 questions that I can address. One is, what if my child has resource room or other special education services? Those services actually will be, in my personal opinion, better because we're all in one area. Students will have the same services that they've had, resource room, ICT skills, consultant teacher, OT, PT, speech. Those will all remain the same. We agree with you at an annual review for a legal document. We entertain that. We then process that, and that's how we set up our programs for the fall. Mrs. Gargiula and I actually were on the phone late last night, and we actually said, you know, if we're all in one building, we could really talk about even making more programs or programs a little bit different for each individual student. So be rest assured that those programs will not change. If anything, they get better as the change, and I just think it's something that would be beneficial for our students. Our teachers would continue to loop. So if we're in a K1 building, that special ed teacher will be the K1 teacher. We'll loop back down to K1. They would not loop from building to building at this point. They would just loop within the building. And I think that's an important piece, that consistency. As far as the related service pieces, again, you can never guarantee that they're going to stay in one building. It's based on the needs of the students, based on the amount of needs in the building. But I think that's the important piece as far as OTPT speech. That is a fluid schedule based on those needs of students in each of the building. As far as the SEL support, how to help transition before and once kids return to school for additional staffing is asked as well. So I think there's 3 questions in there. How are we going to help for transition? I think there's a bunch of different ways. If your child is remote, I think we start those remote conversations. I am actually meeting with quite regularly the mental health team, and we are discussing what would transition look like? What do you think it should look like? Based on other schools, they have people full-time in the building. They do a nice transition from probably January, February onto the next building with the next clinician, joining meetings, joining different activities, and then kids start looking and actually going to the next building. Hopefully when we return in September, we have that option of getting into other buildings. So that's how we would do that prior to going to Princeton Plan if we do go that way. The good thing about our school district is that right now many of our clinicians go between 1 or more buildings, with the exception of the high school. So all of our students know Miss Polito, and probably a lot of you know Miss Polito. She does all of our social emotional second steps. She does good touch, bad touch. She does all kinds of things, and she's our school counselor. So the kids all know her. She services all 857 kids, I believe it's at the elementary level. Miss Marino and Miss Montavo, they both go between several buildings and actually have some students in virtual that they normally wouldn't have. Dr. Lupiani is at Frank G, and that's where she mostly is. However, Dr. Wynn, we utilize from the middle school as well, and she goes into BV when needed for testing and Furnace Wood. So the kids all know these adults, and we would just continue to foster those relationships. Our hope with the mental health staff is that they would remain in a building. And that's what we've really talked about, is remaining in a building and doing a nice transition into the next level. And the purpose of that is if you try to have them loop, you're always going to miss a group, and they're always traveling, which loses time with our kids and being present in a building. Additional staffing, at this point, there is no additional staffing being added for the mental health team, but I believe we have enough staff to currently cover what we need and then some. We can always utilize some of the high school staff, Mr. Stano, who is constantly working with kids in other buildings if we need some testing done. So he has been seen in and out of the buildings as well. So we have some flexibility in other mental health people, but we are not adding staff at this point. What kind of mental health team in the building? And that's what I kind of spoke about. Social worker in every building, in 2 of the buildings, and a psychologist in the 3rd building. And then we would have Dr. Wynn floating between the other 2 elementaries. So you'd have a social worker and psychologist available for students. Miss Polito, our school counselor, goes through all 3 buildings. We were talking the other day, and one of the things that we discussed is maybe she does a cycle at a time, a 6-day cycle, because that grade level would all be in one building. So she would hit all kindergartners, all 1st grade, then she would move to the next building. So she'd be that constant person that all kids would see as well. That answers all of my questions, unless, anybody has any questions for me.
Thanks, Mrs. Schuchman, Mr. Hochreiter, for kind of tying together the big themes that came up. We started a couple minutes late, so if you want to put a question in the chat, someone could answer it before we wrap things up. So take a minute, type it in. And I believe, Shannon, your question that you put in earlier was 2 teachers so far we know of, which brought the number down to 12.
Yes, thank you. I saw that.
Okay, we have a question. Can we keep the staff and reduce over time as the cessation funds depleted? This would help transition to PowerPoint. Some senior teacher may decide to leave over this time, may not want to do a PowerPoint, Princeton Plan. We could. I think, the question's going to be, is the potential change and having moving kids from one elementary school to another for Princeton Plan, is that worth the work and potentially the agony and some of the stress on families, and as Ms. Schuchman said, maybe some stress on kids. The question is that going to be worth it if we're not experiencing the savings? I think the issue is, to be honest, if our year ends with only 2 teachers retiring, I can tell you that's the fewest number of teachers retiring in my 7 or 8 years I've been here. So that's just a real goofy anomaly. The other thing, I'll tell you this though, a year ago at this point, when we were getting nervous about the coronavirus and all of all of the news reports, we had 2 or 3 teachers that identified they were retiring at this time last year. I think we ended up with about 8, because as the spring progressed, as schools were closed, as we realized that we weren't going back, and that going back in September was going to be significantly different, we had a number of teachers that decided to retire because they just didn't want to be a part of it, right? That could happen again. If we decided tomorrow to implement the Princeton Plan, first thing we would do is we would identify which principal would be in which grade level. Then we would identify the teachers that would teach in which grade level, and there is a very specific order of operations we need to follow for that. We don't get to just pick. We have to, follow the law and follow some other considerations. There may be people, and in fact, I'm convinced that when we implement the Princeton Plan, there will be people that will say, okay, thank you, but I wish not to be a part of it for many reasons, personal reasons, professional reasons. So I think that number will grow from 2, but I think the question's really going to be, is implementing the Princeton Plan with some of the stress that comes with it, is it going to be worth it if we don't see the savings immediately? And that will be a question that the board will need to address.
All right, and I just wrote in the chat again, feel free, any other questions? If not, we will wrap it up. This will be put on, a YouTube link for everybody. I'll put it on Twitter. I know it goes to the Facebook page and any other sources, and we will have that session taped tonight as well at 6:30 p.m. All right, Mr. Hochreiter, any final words?
No, just thank you. Thank you for spending some time this morning to be informed and ask questions, and please continue to ask questions. I don't have Facebook, and it's for very good reasons. So if you hear of things that don't make sense on Facebook or social media, please reach out to myself or Mrs. Schuchman around special ed concerns, Mr. Cohen, certainly your PTA reps, including Antoinette and Katie, who's on the committee, and certainly Sandrina. Just let us know what's out there so we can help inform people. I'm sure you have heard, and you've heard some pretty uncomfortable commentary. Change is hard. We've gone through quite a bit of change already. Change on top of change makes people even more uncomfortable. We get it. But the issue is whether we're in a pandemic or not, our financial situation is still the same. Indian Point is still closing, and we still have significant financial matters to deal with. So please continue to be involved and ask questions. We hope that you found today informative. Mr. Cohen and Ms. Flanino did a great job taking your questions and giving us an opportunity, to talk to you about those things and themes. And we hope that you found them valuable. And we'll see you tonight at 6:30, or maybe not. But if we see you again tonight, we look forward to having another conversation with you.
Well, thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.